Do you like half-naked big burly men strong-arming one another? Do you dream of building an ever-expanding harem of such men? If yes, brother, you're in the right place. And if not, you might still want to stick around for a surprise. Bastard Bonds took me by surprise. I've been keeping the game in the back of my mind for a while now, but I always expected the dirty and cruel memefest from it. Having already reviewed multiple straight-up pornographic games in the past, I thought I was getting into more of that, but my expectations were far exceeded. Bastard Bonds is a retro, fast-paced tactical RPG about criminal dudes trying to make the best of their situation, being exiled to a prison island. The one immediately obvious thing that sets Bastard Bonds apart from other games in the genre is that the grand majority of the characters in the game are barely dressed men with bulging muscles and cod pieces. I believe I can call Bastard Bonds the most homoerotic game I've played, and I've played Mount Your Friends. The goal of the game is to escape the criminal-filled island, but it is impossible to do so alone. So aside from wrestling the plethora of monsters, the player gets to capture nearly any zone in the game as a base of operations and recruit nearly any character in the game to do their bidding. I was honestly impressed with the gameplay of Bastard Bonds, so let's talk about that. I'm a pretty big fan of tactical RPGs. I have a whole bunch of them, but I always dread starting any of them because they tend to be painfully long and slow. Turn-based fights in most games take forever, but not in Bastard Bonds. Fighting in Bastard Bonds is reduced to just a few absolutely critical actions. There aren't any convoluted skill trees or cooldowns to keep track of. You either move, defend, or attack. That's it. The one notable action is risk moves, which allow the player to do multiple actions during a single turn, but also increases the risk meter every time. The higher the risk meter, the higher the chance for the character to fail at doing anything and be left with reduced defense. All the same rules apply to the enemies. Such minimalism reduces thinking time and makes the game properly fast-paced, despite being turn-based. There are of course some extra factors in all this like character traits, skills and equipment. I found that positioning in Bastard Bonds is extremely important, because you have to factor in everyone's movement and attack ranges and turn order. Movement and positioning is the thing that has the most variables and tactical impact in fights. That alone makes the combat not completely brain dead. The map of the game is divided into many smaller zones, most of which can also be completed faster than a single fight in most tactical RPGs. Presentation-wise, Bastard Bonds is simple but effective. It uses a retro pixel art style, but also utilizes an impressive character creator that allows you to customize your appearance by choosing from many body types and clothing details. You can be anything from a bear to a twink to a woman. Of course, there's plenty of pixelated nudity, which will cause me a headache having to censor it for YouTube. Due to the impressive clothing system, you can create nearly any outfit from various clothing pieces. So if you so wish, you can run around in assless chaps with your balls dangling free for extra intimidation effect. Again, same applies for enemies. Their clothing pieces are randomized, so while plenty can be dressed pretty modest, there might also be incubi charging at you with uncovered throbbing erections, the size of a Bionicle canister, or a Pringles can for the less cultured ones. And you know what? The nudity in the game makes plenty of sense. The island is filled with either actual law offenders or monsters and demons. 99% of the prison island's population are also males, so homosexuality is also fairly normalized due to the simple lack of choice. Bastard Bonds is literally be gay, do crimes. The game. I was quite surprised with some world building choices in Bastard Bonds too. I would have never expected this game to have horror elements, but there are things that feel like they're straight from Silent Hill. There are weird mutated people with missing heads or nasty tentacles sprouting out of them. There are caves that are made out of meat and bones, not unlike the ones in Scorn. And those giant anuses in the ground are connected by giant entrails, making them serve as way of faster transportation around the island. It's pretty fun that different characters have different attitudes and text lines, but when they repeat often throughout the game, it can get pretty hilarious. Like one of my dudes seeing a torch for the billionth time and still going, "The fuck is that?" The soundtrack consists of mid-bass tunes, like you would expect from a retro-stylized game. There isn't all that much variety in the music, but the tracks that are in the game are all great. There are some real chill vibes. Decent battle tunes. And unexpected yet satisfying head-splitting bass lines. So, as you can see, Bastard Bonds is mostly about conquering the island by capturing other dudes' hideouts and recruiting ever more criminals to your gangbang. But believe it or not, I actually found Bastard Bonds to be surprisingly wholesome. Yes, there's the whole sexuality aspect of the game, but the most I had gotten in my playthrough was just a handjob that I also had to pay for, and it was also presented in just text. Meanwhile, I had encountered a guy who was pretty into a friend of his and started realizing that he will probably never get out of the island or meet any women, so I encouraged him to be gay with his spell, and I honestly felt nice about encouraging someone to pursue love. There is an alignment system in the game. Every character is either chaotic, neutral, or lawful, and you always want your current party members to have at least one buddy in the party with the same alignment so they would perform better in combat. Sort of gay Spartans fighting better when protecting their lovers in arms style. Having recruits in your party often and hanging out with them in your hideout also unlocks the titular bonds with them, which are actually quite important gameplay wise and let you know more about the character's background and inner feelings. It's generally wholesome gathering a ragtag band of all sorts of misfits and getting them to care for one another while the rest of the world is actively against them. So while I was expecting for something filled with jokes and somewhat poor taste, a bunch of no touching, and dudes, sword fighting, and I was going to play the game for the memes, I actually got a really enjoyable and cozy RPG that is engaging enough to constantly stimulate and not get boring, but also chill enough that I could easily play it while splitting my focus and chatting to friends or listening to a podcast. I was having good enough time with Bastard Bonds that I already wanted to start another playthrough with a different character and new knowledge about how to do things before I even finished my first playthrough. And in the end, there seems to be barely more nudity than in something like Conan the Barbarian. So despite the gay meme status, I can actually recommend Bastard Bonds to most people who are old enough to be exposed to several pixelated scrotums and boobas, purely on the merit of it being a good game. After all, Bastard Bonds is not as much about the bulges, but the bulging heart. The game isn't perfect though. It has one of those old school difficulty curves where the beginning can kick your butt, but when you learn the mechanics and level up a bit, the game becomes almost trivial in its mechanical challenges. I straight up died the most in the very first zone of the game. The game progression, meanwhile, is a good bit more complicated and often not explained very well. There is a little questionnaire in the character creator that determines your starting traits and alignment, but you're never told what answers do what in the game. You can't know any stats before recruiting a character. There's this whole thing about manpower score, which is needed to maintain larger hideouts that fit more people, and increasing manpower can get tricky if you don't know how to do it. And again, it's not really explained inside the game. There are some tips in the loading screens, I guess, but they're too short for me to be able to read any of them. Some of the quest progression requirements can get pretty cryptic in an old school sort of way, so you will likely need to revisit most of the zones looking for things to collect or interact with, and likely look up a guide. My main piece of advice without any spoilers would be to hire a quartermaster as soon as possible and hoard items. Finding a blacksmith is also important. Another thing that kept coming to my mind is that Bastard Bonds actually has an incredible potential for a sequel. I'm usually not a huge fan of sequels and remakes, since I'm a believer that if something is good, it should be enjoyed as is. Bastard Bonds, however, I could see getting way better by fixing some of the issues and improving on existing mechanics. Just adding more quality of life features would go a long way. Basic things like inventory or party management could use a facelift. Something as essential as character pathfinding could use improvement too, because my followers would keep getting stuck around tighter corners, and it would be particularly annoying when I don't immediately notice it happening, get into combat, and have to waste numerous turns just to make the stuck dude catch up with the rest of the party, while they're busy getting smacked. Better pathfinding and more elaborate tutorials would be great. I would really love customizable control schemes, so I could play the game with one hand. Not for the sexual reasons, just always having to hold shift while doing the risk moves gets a bit annoying when I want to snack while playing the game or something. It could be interesting to have more interactions with the recruitable characters, both platonic and romantic. I liked increasing manpower to overtake larger hideouts, but that whole system could be improved too. The whole game I could barely manage to get a better stronghold, and I could only increase the capacity of it by just 1 or 2 people at a time. That barely left me any space for any merchants, which are pretty helpful. A lot of the zones were still unattainable for me, even by the time I finished the game, so the only way I can see them being an option is by grinding and min-maxing a lot. If that's improved on, I would love to see a sandbox mode resembling Mount and Blade even, where the goal is to just go around and try to conquer the whole place. The story aside, I really found getting as many companions as I can and getting the biggest base I can engaging. So I could see Bastard Bonds becoming this chill game where I just go around trying to get the biggest base in the game without necessarily having to go for optimal tactics. That alone would be fun without even a story. So yeah, Bastard Bonds good. I was surprised how much I enjoyed this homoerotic fiesta. I didn't even plan to make a video on this game originally, yet here I am with a glowing recommendation. It's not a very expensive game either, especially when it's on sale, so give it a shot if you enjoy tactical RPGs like me and can't be bothered playing 5-hour sessions just to make any progress. Thank you for watching and see you in another video.